Back again YouTube, and welcome back to another video within this series. And in today's video we're going to actually follow on from our last video where we built out our entity class, but in today's video we're going to be actually building out a basic model within our application, so you've got an idea of what the model look like, what it consists of, and what method we're going to be using, and what we can actually do with our model in our controller classes. So we're going to jump straight to it, and I'm going to take you back to our app directory where we add our models directory, which we've created a few videos ago. So I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to name it user model, similar to our user entity that we've created in our last video. We're going to keep the user theme going, right? So I'm going to create a new file called user model.php. And before we start, if I take you back to our core directory, we've got all of our base classes. You'd have remembered that we created a base model, and what this model is, it sort of like instantiate that data repository factory that's going to give us access to all the method that we've created in our repository, right? And within this class we've also got this get repo method, which actually returns our repository object, right? So if we go back to our user model, we're going to actually start coding in, and you're going to see how we're going to implement this particular structure, right? So I'm going to say PHP declare strict types equal 1 namespace, and it's going to be app, and we're now in our model directory, right? It's going to be class user model, which is going to extend something, right? Let's leave that right there for 1 minute, because I'll take you back to the base class, and I want to create an abstract model class. And the idea behind this abstract class is that abstract class is going to extend the core base model file, and it's going to implement some method that I actually want all of my models to actually implement. So leave that class for 1 second, and let me take you back to our main core directory. So I want to create a next directory within this main directory called abstracts. So I'm going to create a new directory called abstracts with ns, and I'm going to create a new class file within this directory, and I'm going to call it abstract model, right? Just abstract model. Actually, let's call it abstract base model .php, and let's build this out like we normally do. Declare strict types equal 1 namespace. It's going to be magma. We're now in the abstract directory, right? I'm going to say class, we're going to say abstract class abstract base model, which is going to extend that base model class, right? And all I want to do for the time being is create an abstract method which I want all of my models in the application to extend or to actually implement. So it's going to be abstract. It's going to be a public function called prevent or prevention IDs, right? And it's not got a body because it's an abstract method that we're declaring, and let's go into return an array just like that. So the idea behind this method is that in each of our model we can define a dynamic, or we can dynamically define an ID, so we're not hard coding it. We can define an ID that we want to prevent from doing certain operations on, i.e., for example, if you're the main site administrator, the last thing you want to do is delete your own account, right? So the idea behind this method is that we're going to implement it in any class that extends this abstract class, and we're going to put or assign an ID in that in this method, which is going to return an array. And what's going to happen is that if you're trying to perform an operation like, for example, delete, then you will not be able to perform that operation on yourself, because you don't want to delete your own account, because that will be a disaster, really. So this is what, or that's what this method is going to be doing. It's going to be an abstract method which every model that extends this abstract base model has to implement. Now, you don't have to return an ID, you just have to implement the method, but you could just declare it and return an empty array. That's fine. But if you want to actually exclude something from being performed on, then we're going to declare that ID within that return array, right? That's the idea behind this method. So let's save that. We're going to come back to our user model, and we're going to extend that abstract base model. So I'm going to say abstract, and it's down here, just like that, and it just brings it in for us automatically. Well, if I take you back, it's been a few videos ago now, we were saying we need to have a model that represent a table in our database, and the idea is we declare a model and we say to our repository, this is our database table name, this is our database table ID. So we need to declare those two constant. So before we start implementing any constants or constructor or method within this class, I want to actually bring you back to the base model. I want to demonstrate or show you exactly what we're doing. So we got our base model, and what that was doing was it was creating an object of that repository factory, right? And part of what that repository factory needed was that table schema and that table schema ID, which is what we're defining in our constructor method. And the idea behind that is, with these two bit of information, well, the main information that it needs really is a database table name, right? And with that info, whatever we supply in our application model, we can then fetch the right information from the right database table. So these are very crucial information that is going to be required, right? So I'm going to declare our database table and our primary key within our application models, so it tells our base model what table to work in. And I'm going to declare two protected constant. I'm going to say protected const. It's going to be table schema, and that's going to equal a table in our database called users, plural, right? Next one is going to be protected constant. It's going to be table schema ID. I'm going to say the ID is, well, ID, because in most table or in most database table, the primary key is always defined as ID. Not all the time, but common. You'll find the primary key for any table is referred to as ID, right? So we've declared our table schema on our table schema ID. So we're going to pass that into the base constructor for the arguments. So I'm going to say public function construct, and we're going to pass that into the parent construct. So I'm going to say parent construct, and we're going to say self table schema self table schema ID. And this is how we use our constant, by using the self keyword, right? And that's pretty much the base or the bare bone of any model that we create in our application. The implementation has to start like this. We define our model, we extend the abstract base model, we define two constants that represents the table and the ID, and we declare this construct method and pass in those constants to the parent construct, which is going all the way back to our base model, right? That is how we get our information from the database. And that's pretty much all there is to this model. But also we can also create our own method within this class as well, and then use it in our controller. So for example, if we're creating something that is very specific that our repository doesn't offer us, we can actually create that within this class and use it within our controller. That's completely acceptable. And also, let's not forget to create that preventions ID method, right? So I'm going to say public function, and it's prevention IDs. That name sounds a bit silly. I think it sounds a bit silly. Let's change it actually. Let's call it guarded ID. Or guarded ID. And we're just going to return an empty array for now. Like so. And let's declare the return type as well, which is going to be an array. So let's copy that and change it inside of our abstract base model. I think that's a better name, guarded ID, right? So this is the basic, again, the basic bare bone of our model, and this is how we're going to be declaring it for all models. And obviously we're going to be changing the database or the table schema to represent the actual table we're trying to pull information from. So that's it for this class, guys. Stay tuned for the next video coming up, where we're going to be pulling these into our controllers and trying to fetch information from our database. So stay tuned for the next video coming up very shortly. And remember to always, like the video, share and subscribe. And if you're new to the channel, I'm Rick. I'm going to be implementing this full series right till the end. So hopefully you guys can get some value so you can then take it and do what you want with it. So stay tuned for the next video coming up very shortly. Peace. Stay blessed.